course, it'll change.
It will change.
That's a difference.
That's what I've heard. So good.
I call this board back into session, and we will return to the Student Learning and Achievement Committee agenda. So I recognize the chairman, Ms. Becky Taylor.
Thank you, Chairman Covey. We're going to pick back up with our action on first reading items, and actually Dr. Tammy Howard's going to come back up and present SLA 3, the 2018-19 Compliance Commission recommendations for the field testing and special studies appeals.
Good afternoon. This item is in respect to another annual occurrence, and that is the appealing of participation in field test. The board may recall last year for the mathematics field test, we went to an embedded system even when we're in the initial year of implementation. We're doing that as well this year for our English language arts field testing. However, this year we also are having to field test our NC Extend 1 assessment, which is for our most seriously cognitively disabled students. It's 1% of our population. These students have very limited capacity to test over a long period of time. That with the fact that they're a small population, so we have to include all of them in the field test. We feel as though it is best to separate their field test experience from their operational testing experience. It would be too much of a burden to combine the field test with all of those students during their operational administration. So we did post this as a field test that districts and schools could appeal. We received 2 appeals, and they were heard by the Compliance Commission on August 23rd, which is the protocol. And the Compliance Commission's recommendation to this board is to deny both of those appeals. I will note that one is from the Durham Public Schools, the Durham School of the Arts, and the second one is from the Community School of Davidson. The Community School of Davidson is experiencing a complete redo of their Wi-Fi system, and we assured the Compliance Commission that if, when we get to March, which is when the field test is scheduled, if at that time their Wi-Fi system is not fully functional, that they can then contact us, and we at that time would remove them from the list. But we just felt as though August was a little bit too early to be doing that. So the 2 that you have before you are the Durham School of the Arts and the Community School of Davidson, and both of these were recommended by the Compliance Commission to be denied. And they are action on first read in keeping with the requirement to notify these schools by October 1st.
Any questions or comments for Dr. Howard? Okay, we will vote on this item tomorrow, and thank you, Dr. Howard. Let's move on down to our discussion item. We have one discussion item, SLA 4, Early Childhood Suspension and Expulsion Report. Dr. Vivian James is going to present this one. Just the topic itself just really grabbed my heart. I think this will be of great interest to the board.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you, Chairman Covey and the board, for having me here. I get to talk about something that I'm pretty passionate about, having been in early childhood special education, especially for over 40 years now. And first, we want to note that we have developed a white paper for you to give you the background information on the topic of early childhood discipline, specifically on suspension and expulsion. And we've also developed a set of guiding practices for you to consider. So our goals today are first to give you the overview of what your public school preschool programs really look like right now, because I'm not sure that you know that. And also to talk about the national data on this particular topic, and to review the new federal guidelines around this topic, and then to ask for you to endorse a set of guiding principles and to set us forth to go and train our school principals and early childhood administrators to help equip them with better tools in order to handle children who have persistent challenging behavior, but they're 3 and they're 4 and they're 5. And then we need to ask your guidance about what to do with Article 27 and 27A of Public School Law, which outlines in general statutes our responsibilities in public schools around discipline. So we'll talk to you about the dichotomy on that. First, we want to say that in the absence of a universal preschool program in North Carolina, our public schools have identified the value and need to have early childhood programs in their public schools by implementing over 2,000 classrooms in the public schools. Now, the children that are enrolled in these classrooms are considered to be at risk because of their family's income or disabled as a result of having an individualized education program. And remember, these are 3, 4, and pre-K 5-year-olds. The research behind the positive outcomes for later school success for children who are at risk, and, I might say, the legal requirements for children with disabilities who are 3 through 5 to be provided a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environments are the 2 key drivers behind the why our public schools are implementing these programs now. But unfortunately, no one funding stream is sufficient to provide a program comparable to our school-age program. We do not receive ADM funding for these children. So our task in the public schools has been to maximize our resources and reach as many of our children by creating a tapestry of the various available preschool funds from the NC Pre-K program, which is administered out of the Division of Child Development and Early Education in DHHS, through our Title I preschool in public schools, and believe it or not, this past year we had over $52 million of Title I funds going into preschool. Through our preschool exceptional children's dollars, as well as through Head Start. 13 of our public schools actually are the grantees for Head Start, and more of our LEAs actually house Head Start programs whose grantees are not the public schools. Now, with each funding source comes a different set of rules, regulations, requirements, and standards. Districts have to comply with rules and regulations from the various programs, some of which are not regulated by the Department of Public Instruction. So when classrooms receive funds from the multiple funding sources, their program administrators must take the program standards from each of these funding sources and layer them on top of one another, and then actually reach to the highest level of each standard. Here's an example. For example, if I have a public school classroom that has Head Start funding and state NC Pre-K dollars, Head Start rules require that there be an adult to child ratio of 1 to 10. But if I receive NC Pre-K dollars in that classroom, I have to follow an adult to child ratio of 1 to 9 because that's their standard. So we rise to the highest level of that standard. That's just an example. Now, every year, my title is the 619 coordinator, meaning I actually coordinate the 619 IDEA grant, which is the preschool exceptional children's grant, which is supplemental to the big grant that our exceptional children's division monitors and administers. And in that grant application, we have been asking our school systems to please report the number of classrooms that you're operating in your public schools. And when we say the word inclusive, we mean that there are at least 50% of the children in that classroom do not have an IEP, okay? A separate classroom is one that has more than 50% of the children with IEPs. But over the last 10 years, our public schools have made significant fiscal investments to upgrade their facilities and to comply with facility safety and sanitation licensure requirements to operate these programs. In North Carolina, under the authority of DHHS, the child care licensure process binds what they call the Quality Rating Improvement System with child care facility safety and sanitation requirements. We have to point out, though, loudly and clearly that while child care licensure is a measure of quality and a good one, too, for the entire state of child care, it does not measure the implementation of high-quality, evidence-based Tier 1 instructional practices that we are trying to do within a multi-tiered system of support within North Carolina. So we just want to show you that we're trying to rise to even a higher level. Nonetheless, we can say that 67% of all of our classrooms have achieved 4- and 5-star license, which, by the way, is extremely high on a national level for public school participation in a state's QRIS. Nonetheless, even though that's a big accomplishment, and it really is over the last 20 years that I've been doing this here in North Carolina, we still have 33% of our classrooms who have not hit those standards or have not applied for those standards yet. To better understand the relationship between all of the different kinds of classrooms in the guiding practice document under Appendix A, because our legal counsel said we needed to do it because we needed to make sense of what we were going to explain to you. We've done a graph to show you which kinds of classrooms must comply with child care licensure and which do not have to. So we basically have two issues. And today's piece that we're going to point out to you and focus in is on the disparity and the differences in rules and regulations around early childhood disciplinary actions that we take. So first, our big issue is what do we do about unlicensed classrooms that do not have to comply with basic DHHS rules and standards. But specifically today, we want to point out the issue around discipline in our public school law. So this is why we have brought to you a set of guiding practices, and we will explain to you that the intent for having the guiding practices is to align what we're doing in the public schools with the developmentally appropriate practices around early childhood discipline that is expected of us from other regulatory agencies. Nationally, the problem of suspension and expulsion of young children due to behavioral concerns is becoming a hot topic and well known. But just in case you didn't know about it, we provided the review of the literature in the white paper for you. And we also gave you an infographic, which I think is attachment 3, which just highlights some of the things that are in there. For example, young children are frequently sent home for behavioral reasons 3 times the rate of school-age children. Nationally, state preschool programs are made up of children of color, about 18% of the total population. However, that 18% of the total population consists of 48% of those children being sent home for disciplinary practices. And we think that their root causes are this. First, there's a lack of understanding of the developmental process in the pro-social behavior. Our principals and many of our teachers have a mindset of ages 5 through the end of age 5, right? Mm-hmm. But what it looks like in a 3, a 4, or a pre-K 5-year-old, and they're at risk and they might be disabled. So they might actually be functionally much younger than that. I see an amen coming up here right here. Okay, and so we have this that we're trying to address, is that we're trying to get forth and train the teachers effectively on effective teaching practices and what are developmentally expected behaviors. But we need to support our principals in a mighty way to help them. We also think that there's a lack of awareness around implicit bias. The research is very clear, and it doesn't even need to be a teacher who is white or black, both equally have implicit bias against especially big black boys who are little. And then there is a lack of evidence-based teaching practices that are meant to facilitate social emotional development and prevent challenging behaviors. So starting in 2008, the Office of Early Learning identified and prioritized the need to develop professional development and get it out there to teachers to equip them with the right skills. We began exploring the nationally recognized preschool pyramid model and piloted it in several LEAs, and we began the serious business of statewide scale-up in 2016. Today, we have about almost a fourth of our 1/3 of our LEAs in the project, and they're all at various stages of implementation. Because you, in your wisdom many years ago, said that any initiative that this department rolls out will follow those implementation science strategies, we were there at the table with the state implementation team learning those tricks as we were developing this framework. And so we have been incorporating that since 2013. And what you can imagine, you know MTSS very well. One of the 6 critical elements of MTSS is that we have a tiered intervention approach. This is the tiered intervention approach for early childhood in your public school systems. And we went after the social emotional piece first because we knew that this is equipping them to learn, getting them ready to learn. And our teachers have told us, once we get these practices down pat, I can teach them the emergent literacy, math, and science stuff. But first, this has to come first. So our model actually promotes increasing a teacher's ability to create early childhood environments and to support positive behaviors and intentionally teaching young children the language, the concepts, and the problem-solving skills that lead to positive social emotional outcomes. A summary of the project and our data is in your white paper. And we must point out that this project is a part of the Exceptional Children's State Systemic Improvement Plan. Was incorporated into their theory of action and is the early childhood's answer to helping to close the gap in graduation rates for children with disabilities. We have been reporting this data federally for the last 5.5 or 6 years now. More recently, we have been doing cross-sector, cross-division work with the Integrated Academic and Behavior Systems, the IAB system, Dr. Jablonski's systems, and Dr. Jablonski's division. And we are working on a communication plan with them to push this out into the MTSS framework. Now, the issue of what about all these regulatory requirements? The document on the left is about significant disproportionality for children with disabilities. In the past, the Exceptional Children's Division, and I am in the Office of Early Learning, but I straddle to the Exceptional Children's Division, and I'm working in the IABS group too. But in the past, the state had to monitor school systems on disproportionality in 3 things. Discipline, meaning suspensions and expulsions, placement, and what category of disability did you put those children in. Never before were 3 through 5-year-olds with disabilities included into this. This has now gone through a revision, and we must report, I say report, in 2022, the disproportionality in disciplinary practices and a category of eligibility. But what I have to point out is that we have to have 3 years worth of data to count. So this coming year would be the year that we would begin to ramp up everybody's knowledge about what is being done, needs to be done, and then we collect data in 1920, 2021, 21, 22. That's our 3 years of baseline. But in order to calculate disproportionality, we don't need to know just who had which 3, 4, and 5-year-olds with an IEP were suspended or expelled, but we have to have a denominator to calculate the equation. So we have to have all children accounted for. Issue right now is not all preschool children are enrolled in Power School. And attendance is not being capped. The only children in Power School right now are those with an IEP. So that's an ask that I'm going to be asking of you today, is for you to take a look at that. The Office of Child Care reauthorized their federal legislation in 2014, and our office, as well as the Exceptional Children's Division's monitors, helped me work with that department to create their suspension and expulsion policy that had to go into their plan. But their policy, we would say, had no pieces of accountability whatsoever. It's just kind of a policy light with no accountability, because it covers all of child care, right? Private child care. We're talking about public schools. And then on the right is the piece of legislation. All these things came out just bing, bing, bing right after each other, because the research has been out there. That's the Office of Head Start. And they came out with a policy that actually prohibits expulsion and limits suspension to temporary based on dangerous behavior, that we have to stop, take a breath, and develop a plan. So these are the issues that we're facing right now, and why we have to, and then there was one other thing, is that the North Carolina NC Pre-K program put a rule in place through the Child Care Commission that said that it did not forbid suspension or expulsion, but it did say you must do these things first before you go there. I think that's best practice, but it is not what is in our public school law. So based on this, what we have done is we worked with a cross-sector child care community, but we have also worked with well over 300 participants through public school administration. We've done 2 major listening sessions with them. The first one was in January of last year, and we asked them to please address what are the challenges that you see for a public school to develop a plan. And they talked a lot about Power School. How are we going to get these kids in Power School, because not all children are in Power School. And then they also talked about the fact that we don't have common language about what this disciplinary practices are. And if you look at Article 27, it defines the terms for them in there. And so that is what we put in our guiding practices, using a lot of national information. We know in the guiding practices that we want to say we must track children's preschool attendance, which, by the way, on an aside, also addresses your interest in looking at the continual absences. So, and in your definition of that, you said it was before children went to compulsory attendance age. So there's another thing there. I just realized that early this morning. So, and then in the guiding practices, we asked for requiring, and this is in alignment with MTSS actually, is requiring that our teachers have access to and receive professional development for core instructional practices and promoting social emotional development and preventing challenging behaviors. And we have developed all of this professional development. We are ready to go, and we have 39 LEAs that are already doing it and using it now. We even have online courses for them to take. But this was the discussion. The 4th bullet down is about a district-wide response plan. We know that research tells us when teachers don't know what to do or who to call, and they've got a problem, they're going to go to the person they trust and love the most, and that's their principal, right? And the principal will help and support them. What we have found in our targeted project is that when we have and here's our issue, we might have an elementary school here with one preschool classroom, an elementary school here with another preschool classroom, and they're standalone, and they're the only preschool classrooms. But in our targeted project, what we've done is we've developed a district-wide response plan with early childhood people on it, so the principals know who to call. And it provides support to the principals on what to do next. And the principals that we've worked with and done this plan with have really appreciated this. But we know the research tells us when teachers know who to call and what to do, then the chance of the children being sent home drops dramatically. And we have research on this. It's in the white paper for you to take a look at. And then what we're asking for in the guiding practice is to severely limit the exclusionary discipline practices. I think in Article 27, expulsion, it's kind of easy for us to address this because it talks about children over the age of 14 for expulsion. However, I personally have handled a situation in an LEA where a child was truly expelled at the age of 4. So, the isms behind some of this is that people think that because our children haven't hit mandatory attendance age, that the same rules for K-12 don't apply to 3 through 5-year-olds, but they do. And so when I send Johnny home because he's having a bad day, but he had a bad day 2 days last week too, that's really a suspension. So this district-wide plan mirrors MTSS, except that it's a district-wide plan rather than a school-wide plan. So our asks of you are that we're asking you to endorse a set of guiding practices and let us go forth and train our principals and train our early childhood leaders who are not in the targeted project, but to let them equip them with the skills that they need and the tools that they need to keep our children in our programs and not send them home. We need to have a requirement of attendance data on our preschool children, including the disciplinary actions. And finally, I need guidance, or we need guidance, on how the board thinks that we might address the issue around developmentally appropriate practices for handling persistently challenging behaviors, and how Article 27 and Article 27A are written. So that's it.
Wow. Okay. That was difficult to listen to for me. And then your slide, oh my goodness, the one with the little child. Very emotional. Any comments or questions? I know you're asking for us to endorse some policies, and of course I do think we need to begin tracking attendance absolutely before they get in kindergarten. So I don't know what we have to do to get them into Power School, if that's something that comes from us, or if that's, I'm not sure the procedures on all this, but I think you have our support. We definitely want to reduce the number of preschool kids that are suspended, expelled. To me, that just, I don't even think of first and second graders with that happening on this frequency. So I think this is a very serious matter. Dr. Oxendine?
Yes, thank you so much. I don't think I've heard a presentation like this since I've been on, to my knowledge, since I've been on the board. It was very eye-opening, and it really did strike to the heart chords, no doubt about that. My question is, are there any kind of, I don't know, the word safeguard isn't the appropriate term, guidelines, parameters around which, let's say, a 3-year-old is suspended for X number? Is there a law about how many days a 3-year-old can be suspended? Must the parents or the guardian agree to make sure there is someone there in the home to take care of the child, to supervise the child? It seems like when we put a 3-year-old out of school, something else needs to happen by way of assuring that child is, of course, at home, but everything is right.
Well, Dr. Oxendine, some of the cases that I've personally handled, and the ones that I've handled are little ones with IEPs. I've seen moms lose their jobs because they were called out every day at a certain time to come and pick Johnny up. No, we don't. And that's what I'm saying, is that Article 27 really does address that. It talks about short-term suspensions being up to 10 days, long-term suspensions. You know, there is a time and place. I never, ever want to say zero tolerance for anything except for expulsion. There may be a different place that a child should be moved to, but not expelled, right? And not that. But that's what we need to address. That is where we need to go with this. But our stakeholders did tell us there are cases where our little ones are Tier 3 early childhood mental health issues. I have personally dealt with children like this, but their families need the help as much, you see, because we have to address, and that's one of the things that our tiered pyramid model does. It has a huge family engagement piece. And also in the guiding practices, when we talk about suspending a child, that we have to have a plan in place for how we worked with the family. Because these are young people. These are young people having little kids, you know. And we need to help them too. So, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, definitely. This is back to the whole child model.
It
which
is.
so important. Mr. Alcorn, I think, has a question or comment.
Question, comment. The comment is that the place to find or to help do these Power School sign-ups and things like that, for us in our county, it's the health department. They do a great job in the WIC program, and maybe there's a combination or a way to work with them. Also, the pediatric clinics are great. They're busy. They got lots going on, but sometimes they can be supportive. And the English as a second language directors of the school systems have the families and communities that they reach out to that may be starting with that 14-year-old and the 8-year-old, but also helps out with seeing the younger children too. So that's if you're.
It's perfect to identify where your resources are. We have begun to work with Rosalind Galloway with a home base and Power School, and work with them to begin to develop guidance to school systems to enroll. We feel that if you would endorse these practices, and with that, then we can. It's all there. We just have to put in reasons for early childhood disciplinary actions, and we're also identifying the children, the different characteristics of the children. But I will say, Ms. Taylor, that they did a data dive for us just to take a look to see what was in there, and I did see a 3-year-old. I saw more than one 3-year-old suspended for insubordination. So it's either A, we don't have the right reasons in there, right? Okay. But if we put parameters around this, that it's temporary in nature, much like the language of Head Start, which is very good language, and that that you have to put an intervention plan in place immediately, that we have to do something. It's not just that, I can't do that today. So.
Well, and I think the professional development is so critical. I mean, your slide says it so well. Mr. Alcorn?
The last bullet line that you have on the guiding practices, could you talk about that a little bit more? The required documentation for families, is that in the white paper? Can I find that somewhere?
It's a requirement from child care licensure. For every program, we have to have a handbook for families, and we tell them what our policy is, what our procedures are for documentation. Personally, I think that if any child that is disciplined in any way at the age of 3 or 4, pre-K-5, that we should have something that the parents have acknowledged that they know, that we have either put a child in timeout or that today was such and such a day and we went home at 12 o'clock.
Okay, any other questions or comments at this time? This was and I don't want to say great presentation. The topic was not great, but you did a good job of it. I mean, this is a difficult conversation to have.
I've been breathing this one for 5 years, so yeah.
Yeah. Wow, bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's move to our new business items. We have 2 items. The first one, an overview of our current state and federal assessments in North Carolina public schools, and Dr. Eric Hall is going to present this item.
Good afternoon, Chairman Kobe, Vice Chairman Davis, Superintendent Johnson, members of the board, the advisory, and citizens of North Carolina. I'm happy to stand with you today to talk a little bit about a conversation we engaged in last month. You may recall that when I stood here last time, we were talking about a policy that was up for discussion, and what I noticed right away is that it created a lot of dialogue. It brought forward a lot of questions. It was about trying to understand, I think, a lot of moving parts about our assessment programs here at the agency. And I think, my takeaway from that conversation last month was, how do I sit down with our team and get a better understanding of where are we in all the different assessment programs that we're doing here across the state? And what I also found internally with our teams is that there were also a lot of questions, a lot of moving parts of our assessment programs. And so what I thought best, instead of coming back to talk about a policy, let's talk instead about where we are. What are we currently doing? Because in order to put a path to go forward, to create a vision for where we go, we got to know what our starting point really is. And that's where I thought, instead of, again, talking about policy, let's talk about where we are, what are we doing, and then work together to see how do we create a vision for where we go forward, and looking at where we can make some potential changes in our assessment programs, our testing programs, to reduce the testing that's either currently in place, or in some cases even look at how can we reduce testing time so that we can keep more time on instruction, empower our teachers, not create undue stress on students, and also just look at some different ways of how we communicate the good parts of our assessment programs that are working really well. Since last month's discussion, I can tell you, I've had superintendents reach out to me, and they've talked a lot about, some components of the testing that they think are very effective, that they're asking that we continue to have conversations about with the board. And I look forward to today just, again, providing you a general overview as a starting point for where we go forward over these next few months and potentially over the next couple years to see where we move with our assessment programs here at the state. So first thing I'll say is, obviously no surprise. Let's talk about the purpose. Let's understand what the purpose is going to be, how much is enough, and what's reasonable and effective. No surprises there, but when you think about testing, you can think about it in a couple different ways. We can think about how does it give us information to know where our students are, what do they need in order to be effective, how do teachers support the students based on assessment information to design instruction and support to help guide improved growth and academic proficiency. But it can also tell us certain things like accountability, right? We look at EVOS data for our teachers. We look at school growth data, proficiency data, everything that goes in to things like the accountability report that we discussed earlier. So using these questions, I think, is a foundation to guide the conversation as we go forward and really present this information in a way that, again, not only is important for all of us to understand as an agency and with the board, but how do we also have it in such a way that our parents, our teachers, and everybody that's out there doing the hard work day in and day out understand how our testing programs can best benefit them and ultimately benefit our students. One tool I will point to that's also on eBoard in alignment with this presentation is the team and I put together a small spreadsheet that kind of shows you from grades K through 12 the different assessments that are offered here across the state. What you're going to find is that it breaks out by grade level the tests that they're going to be taking, and it's there again as a tool for you to see all the different tests that are going out again across the state between our EOGs, BOGs, final exams, and other assessments that are coming out as part of our work here at the agency. I'll start with our K2 assessment, and just as a visual, if you're looking on eBoard, it should be the one that it looks just like this. I just saw a couple people looking, so I want to make sure I pause for a second to see. And I will tell you, it's easier to enlarge on the screen than it is to look at on the paper, but I will work on that.
Dr. Hall, may I stop
Yes,
you
ma'am.
real quickly? Okay, so when we're talking about assessments, and you've used tests and assessments, are they the same?
I think some of it is based on semantics and how they're used,
Okay.
and some of it depends on the division. It depends on who is putting out the information. And I did that intentionally so that it helps us to start thinking about how do we differentiate as an agency.
Right.
Because again, if you're a teacher, those might mean very different things.
Exactly. And evaluations, assessments, and tests.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So in this first section, I want to talk about K2 assessments. This is where we started last month, correct? When we looked at the policy for KNEC-016. It was around the K2 assessments that we have in policy and things that we're doing here, both in the agency and across the state. So the KEA, for example, again, these are assessments. That one is done within the first 60 days of school. We heard our Teacher of the Year talk about that a little bit and her perception. And that's a piece of, information that's helpful to us because we also know that that's not something we're collecting data on back here at the state agency. That is for, formative assessment, and that's for the teachers and the schools to be using. We have Amplify, which, many of you know is our Reading 3D. We have the K2 math assessment, which was a big part of our conversation last month. Those are assessments that are produced here. And if we think about K2, it's about how is our K2 strategies, which are supported out of standards, curriculum, and instruction, how are those being used in a formative way so that when we reach third grade and we start talking about the accountability and the information that's going into looking at the proficiency rates of our students, they're focused on, again, the formative aspects of what we're doing to prepare kids for when they get to third grade.
Okay, can I
Yes,
stop
ma'am.
you right there? Because I heard you talk about formative, and we know formative and summative are two things that we're gonna be addressing also.
Yes, ma'am.
And they mean different things. And I'm glad we're having this conversation. I think this was definitely the way to go after last month's debacle of trying to figure out how do we handle a policy that sounded very conflicting and to some it sounded the same. So as we go through these, because of the recent communications from the superintendent out to the districts and to the public, I want to know how we can help. I want to know what we can do, because it sounds to me like from the communications, when I read for the teachers and it's coming from the superintendent saying, I'll be urging the State Board of Education to eliminate certain tests in grades K-5 caused by state board policies. I'd like to find out exactly which policies the state board has that are causing tests that need to be done away with. Yes. And as far as being collaborative, you don't have to urge us. We just need to communicate and figure out how to make this happen. We want to fix it. I will tell you, reducing the number of tests in the schools is not a new idea. We've been talking about it since I've been sitting in this seat for 5 years. So if there are policies that we have in place, I would like to know them, and I'd like for us to be able to revisit them. I don't think there's anyone else that probably feels differently, because we talk about how teachers are in the classroom to teach. So please tell me, of these, which of these are ones that are from state board policy, or are they from our ESSA plan, or federally regulated, or state? Are they statute, or are they, solely from us?
So I'm more than happy.
Okay.
Do you want me to respond, or?
Yeah.
I saw you look, okay, sorry. So I think with your question, Ms. Taylor, I'm going to have to come back with you, and I can actually get you a map that maps all of that out, very much like I did with the spreadsheet that's here, that shows where it is by state board policy, where it is based on federal.
Okay.
And I
Do
see
you
Mr.
have that?
McDevitt. I did not include it in today's presentation, I did not.
Yeah,
I saw another question, I'm sorry.
Is that something that we would be able to get?
Yes, ma'am.
We could take a break today and get it, since you have it?
I can provide some of that. For example, we do know that there's a new list that will be coming out by the November State Board meeting. That is part of a requirement for October 1st for local LEAs to also submit testing information. That's why I wanted to start here, so that we start to build a conversation about what are we currently doing.
Okay.
To give you another example, there's going to be an RFP that's coming out for the M class coming up as well. So there are some emerging changes, and I think with all of those pieces that are moving together, my hope was to tell you where we are,
Okay.
and then be able to lay out a map of where we go forward, and also do kind of an assessment of which things are directly in state board rule,
Yes,
and which things also align with opportunities under ESSA,
yes.
with some of the new flexibilities, so that we can come back with a more comprehensive strategy in the months ahead.
Okay, Dr. Oxenine?
Right, that would be very pertinent information, helpful information. I'm looking at, I'm back on the overview, the horizontal overview of the assessments.
Your
And
spreadsheet.
The spreadsheet, right. And I'm looking at, for instance, the North Carolina check-ins for ELA reading. And the taking to that. See, I would see that as, I don't want to get too picky here, but I would see that as, not really mandated.
Your option.
And it's not. And it is a formative assessment that is
but it's
optional to
also-
districts.
But it's also it's grouped with a lot of that are mandated.
And that's where I can actually differentiate for you on here, things that are formative in nature. This was just to give a snapshot, because NC check-ins are something that actually superintendents have also expressed they're very happy about.
Yes.
They see it as a great tool to support
Exactly.
what they're doing in the schools.
Right.
This is just, again, recognizing that we have multiple assessments and things that are produced or supported by this agency. And how do we put that out in a way so that we understand where we are, and then look at which things do we continue to support going forward, and which things do we potentially tweak in the months ahead.
we don't want to get rid of that.
And I've heard that part, yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so of those four right there, are those from state board policy? Is that because of us? Do we have a policy that's saying that this has to stay?
So there are some things that fall within the Read to Achieve legislation, but there are also some things that are offered as, because they are formative, we can come back and look at the policies and see. But I think to answer your question today, Ms. Taylor, again, I didn't come prepared today to talk about what's in policy. The goal today was to be able to just provide a general overview of where we're at with the assessments.
All right, the superintendent, I'm assuming you have, since you're telling the public that, you know, that the state board is causing all these tests from our policies. Do you know which policies? Can you tell me?
Yes, we've had this discussion. We started this discussion last month, and we got a lot of pushback from trying to first eliminate the policy and then revise the policy. But please, we need to talk about how there are tests that are created by our curriculum instruction team, standards curriculum instruction, that is then disseminated out to local districts, and that test is given, but does not need to be. And then if we want to talk about today, we can talk about the North Carolina final exams for 4th grade science and social studies and 5th grade social studies.
So if I jump ahead based on that,
Who's requiring those?
All right, Mr.
The
Davis?
author of the test and the requirement for the test are two entirely different animals. I think Ms. Taylor's question is right to the heart of this issue, and that is, what of these test assessments, evaluations, whatever, which ones of these are required by state law, and which ones are required solely by this board? That's the issue. Because what's required solely by this board, we can, and I feel confident, we'll take immediate action on.
But what are they?
So which ones are they?
so again, I'm more than happy to come back with that information. Today's presentation was trying to be a response to conversations that we had last month, when I saw that there were many questions around the number of tests and the assessments that we had coming out from the agency. But I did not, over the past 30 days, did not dive into looking at the existing board policies, other than the KN EOC that we discussed last month. Because again, I think with the number of questions that I've seen, and also dialogue within the agency, as we've been doing some cross-division discussions about where some of these assessments are owned and produced, it creates a large discussion.
Then why are we attributing to this board test if we don't know the answer to that question?
If we need to get Tammy to come up and talk about the NC final exam, 4th grade social studies science, NC final exam, 5th grade social studies.
And I am, yes, sir. And I can ask, Dr. Howard to step forward, but I think when we talk about that exam, it's a good example of where we're using data, EVOS data, that shows us the number of, teachers that are using EVOS, particularly in, the final exams for science and social studies. But
No, I appreciate that. It's good to have that discussion. I think this conversation has just gone back to where we were last month again, with specific policy changes the state board can make to eliminate tests, as opposed to just a review of all the tests, then having that conversation again later.
Correct. And I think the reason it's going that way is because when I keep reading all these releases saying that the state board is causing all these tests and you're going to urge us to eliminate policies that we have in place, I want to be able to defend that. Tell me what I can do. If there are, I asked staff to come up with all the current required tests in a chart and to let me know, according to what they researched, which I figured y'all may know more because you've been working on this, which one are there because of federal law, ESSA, state plan, and which are required by state board policy only. There are none that they found under state board policy only.
We talked about this policy last month, the one that is putting out there final exams that are for K through 2 students based on what the work in this department's producing. And I want to eliminate that. And we can eliminate that. We can take action to eliminate that.
Is that in board policy?
Is that, where is
Yes,
that
we-
test?
We talked, this is the one we talked about last month, but we
On here.
acknowledged that there was a lot of questions around this, so we wanted to take it a step back and start the conversation on testing. then identify those K2 assessments, and then talk about these 4th and 5th grade assessments as well, and the steps that the state board can take, and I will urge the state board to take them to eliminate these certain tests.
Can you go back to the previous slide, please?
Yes, ma'am.
If we're talking K2. What tests are we talking about?
Yeah, these are the ones.
Just these 4? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, we don't.
No. Are these, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Are these the 4 K2 tests we're talking about?
No, again, we're talking about diving into the K2 math assessments and
That's it.
Well, I mean,
the
it's up
final,
there.
and yes, and it's great, it's great. We need to identify everyone we can, and that's why we're trying to take a pause on the work, because there was so much concern last month about what we were bringing, and so much back and forth, that we said, okay, let's start the conversation over. Let's go over everything, and then the ones that you can eliminate in your state board policy, which they are there, I will be urging you to eliminate.
Okay, that's what I'd love to see with these tests. Show us the ones with the policy. That's what I think we need to see. Which ones are these on a spreadsheet?
The chart that you were reading from says that's a state law.
K2 math
K2
assessment.
math assessment, state law. So this board cannot.
Unilaterally.
Right, no, there, again, as we tried to talk about last month, there's a conflict between the board and the state law, and the board policy is actually asking for a little bit more than the state law is, so we can actually
What is it?
take that back. I'm gonna need, Dr. Howard, I'm gonna need you to step in here.
And I apologize, but I'm not an expert on the K2 math assessment. My knowledge in the K2 world is that there cannot be a standardized assessment for grades K2. My recollection, and I think Dr. Maria Petrie-Martin can speak to that better than I can, but many years ago, there was a requirement in the law that there is an instrument to determine how students are doing. So that would not be a summative assessment, and a summative in that context is probably considered a standardized assessment. It would be more for informational purposes. And I think at that time, the curriculum team here at the department developed this assessment. It is optional. That particular tool, I think my recollection is that the requirement is in law. The actual tool is available for districts, and districts can use one of their choosing if they choose not to use that. And Dr. Petrie-Martin might have something else.
That's what I thought.
As was stated, I believe last month, the critical piece of the K2 math assessment has to do with standardization and summative. So if you take a look at the state law that was recently passed, and I believe it might have been in 2014, there was a statement about kindergarten first and second graders not being exposed to a standardized summative assessment. So I think what is being brought to the table is that particular assessment, because you're right, there is a law that talks about needing to know how students are performing in kindergarten, first, and second grade. I think the critical piece here is the standardized summative piece, which in law it states we should not be doing with kindergarten, first, and second graders. So, in my opinion, listening to the conversation, that's where we probably need to have some discussion.
Right, and that's an example where we can update the state board policies we discussed last month to eliminate the work going on here that is creating these summative assessments that are then going out to the district and being given in classrooms. And the reason I found out about this is because a teacher brought it to my attention.
Are they optional?
Not when the teacher gets it. So I don't know if it's the principal giving it to the teacher, if it's the district, but we do not need to be making them here.
Okay, Dr. Oxendine.
So, Superintendent Johnson, the assessments that are being developed in-house, are those assessments on this chart?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. That is the K2 math assessment.
The K2 math assessment?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I thought there was something else being designed in-house for ELA.
We use Amplify for that. We use Amplify, which is part of M-Class, the DIBELS, the Reading 3D. So for our K2.
Right, and that is state law.
Correct.
Ms. Willoughby?
Okay, I just
Very
need a
confused.
clarification here because I've had a lot of questions, post your press conferences, press releases, saying that, you know, what Ms. Taylor just mentioned, that you're reducing testing because you're gonna tell the state board to get rid of the test. And I've had a whole lot of questions about that, as probably a lot of other board members have. And I appreciate that Dr. Shu sent out a clarification yesterday in your superintendent's report about this. But could we ask you to please do a clarification in a press release, much like the press releases you've done otherwise? Because I'm confused here. It sounds like you're saying, to Mr. Davis's point, the tests are produced here. They're not required by the state board. I'm confused, and I think that's where the questions I'm getting at least are questions of confusion when they're saying to me, you're requiring this test, and I'm looking saying, well, Read to Achieve requires some tests, but I don't know what the superintendent's talking about.
Yes,
If you
I will be urging, nowhere have we ever said that all this testing comes from the state board.
But you said
I
some
said
of it did.
Some of it does. And Dr. Howard, you're going to have to come, please talk about NC final exams, 4th grade science, social studies, and 5th grade social studies. And we're just going to have to start the conversation now.
Okay, so NC final exams, of course, provide information for educator effectiveness. And my understanding is that, of course, is required in state law. And so when those assessments were put in place, at grade 4 and grade 5, we have a small number of teachers who do not teach English language arts reading or mathematics. And so in order to give them the opportunity to have an educator effectiveness EVOS growth rating, then the department created NC final exams in science and social studies for grade 4 and in social studies for grade 5. So the discussion has been that those are very limited in use across the state to a handful of teachers, and we have the numbers. I apologize, I do not have the numbers with me now.
It's okay, because we're not asking you to take action on that now. We're giving you the background on everything. I think that's where Dr. Hall was going. That is an example where there is the opportunity here for the state board to eliminate, 3 tests if it makes a decision that we're going to have that very small number of teachers not have the EVOS score that comes from it. So that is an example of 4th and 5th grade tests that are caused by state board policy.
And sometimes what happens, of course, if I may, sometimes what happens, of course, is the requirement is in state law, and then the implementation of that in state board policy. So I'm pretty sure I'm correct that if we go look at state board policy, there is a policy that specifies the grade 4 science and social studies NC final exam and the social studies grade 5 NC final exam. And so it is specified in board policy.
And I think Dr. Oxnine made a
Is
perfect
that policy
point.
based on state law?
Yes, to my understanding it is.
That's the point. Show us what we can unilaterally change, and we'll do it. But if it depends on an act of the General Assembly, that's where we have to start.
That's right. Or Congress.
Yeah. Yeah, state, federal statute, we have to follow it.
Yeah, this board argued or advocated in our ESSA planning that we should use multiple measures and not rely solely on standardized tests. And we were told in state law, you had to use standardized tests. So I think we're on the same page.
We are,
We just are not together on how to move forward on a solution.
right,
Because the solution, frankly, starts with the General Assembly.
right.
I was
Mr.
going to say,
Duncan?
is it possible we can restyle this conversation, which is less focused on the past and more focused on the future, which is how do we collectively, I think we're all in the same place. I think the superintendent's articulately expressed why he's not in favor of over-testing. I think this board, to a person, is in favor of not over-testing. Is there a way we can move the conversation to a place where how do we best utilize our resources together to try to implement the result that I sense
Right.
everybody in the room wants to achieve?
Yeah, I agree with you, Mr.
Absolutely.
Duncan. In addition, if you look at testing from a student's perspective, summative or formative, it doesn't matter. They're all high stakes. So what the student experiences can't distinguish between federal, state board, local board. It's all testing.
Or teacher.
So the issue goes beyond just what we can do at the state. It includes what local districts, like the ones we've served in.
So if there are things we collectively believe are tests that go to the category of we don't necessarily think we all sort of come to a place where we agree we might not need that test, then can we collaboratively get together and go to the legislature or whatever authority is that brings about the basis for this test and try to bring about a result that benefits our educators and benefits our students from the stress that comes with some of these tests.
Correct.
Both for educators and students, both of them feel stress.
Which I think that would fall a lot on the superintendent if there are some that we feel like state statute is telling us to do certain things, for you to communicate and then come back and guide us, and this is where we can go. Because we take direction, I mean, that happens in this building and it comes to us. So, you know, I'm very happy that now, you know, I've been working with you now for about 1.5 years, but I'm glad that now this topic is coming up and we're gonna do something. I'm sorry I'm not gonna be here to be a part of it occurring in the next few months, but I think that's where we are. And I think we should be on the same page. It shouldn't be somebody trying to put the blame on someone else.
Yeah.
We're in this together, and that's where we need to be.
Well said.
Okay, continue. I mean, I think really, basically, I've gone through this, which is why I asked the staff to prepare this. I mean, I see all these tests listed, and that's great to see. But if we're not gonna discuss which ones we can control at this time or have a policy, I'm not sure why we just need to keep going through them one by one unless anybody else feels the need.
And I am.
Yes, Superintendent.
Yes, ma'am.
This may be a part question and part suggestion to inform the future conversation, but you have in the layers of testing, and I think what Dr. Howard was bringing out, the NC finals in 4th grade specifically are when you don't have an EVOS, a score for effectiveness of the teacher. So that's less about the student and about the requirement to have that measure for the teacher. Is that a state board policy that every teacher have an effectiveness rating, or is that in state statute?
So I can ask Dr. Howard to confirm that for me, but my understanding is that that is an area where we have to have an EVOS score, but it is not required necessarily for it to be a science and social studies EVOS score.
Yeah, thank
So
you.
it-
Yeah, thank you for saying
But
that.
the, where the difficulty comes into play in a district is if they're blocking and a teacher wouldn't have another
Correct.
effectiveness rating through a language arts or math.
Right.
And so you have a desire. There were lots of conversations several years back, even with, you know, our program enhancement teachers like art, music, and PE, would they be assigned, you know, an overall growth score? And there was some pushback from the districts and pushback specifically from those teachers because they felt that was unfair and didn't measure their type of teaching, which led to a whole pathway down, what was that called?
ASW.
Yes, and then we did it. So this is something I've long said, and I think it needs to be a part of this conversation. As a state, as a nation, we have lots of stakeholders who encourage us to evaluate teachers based on test scores. And the only way to do that is if there's a test, right? We want to have something like that. But there's a cognitive dissonance in all of these stakeholders in saying more tests to assess the teacher, but not more tests for kids. And we've really got to work to find that balance. And I think the layering is not just, is it required by state board policy? Is it required by state statute? But the other purposes behind that as well. And not just, there's not just one little thing to say about each test, but maybe some multi-layering of the reasons and the requirements.
Well, and also in support of the superintendent's focus on personalized learning, which we all know is wonderful, that it's going to involve assessing. If you're going to personalize, you're going to have to go through some, you know, ongoing formative assessments. So,
And also recall that the legislature prohibited us at one time from using the word portfolio at all. And also any kind of conversation about requiring graduation projects, which were authentic measures of assessment. So it comes right back to tests. And I understand we asked that question at the beginning, is tests and assessments the same thing? They really don't have to be. But based on a whole lot of law, at this point, that's where we are.
okay.
And by the way, the portfolio requirement is at least 15 years old when they prohibited that, so I'm not saying anything about that.
All right, so I think with the discussion we've had, and certainly I like the suggestions from across the the table here, from our superintendent and Mr. Duncan, it's almost like we need to go in a different direction with this moving forward instead of belaboring where we've been. But on the other hand, I do think all of us are sitting around this table. If we are to blame, we want to know. So I would love to know that information. Is there something that we have in place solely from a board policy, not from state or federal ESSA guidelines or mandated to us? Then I'd like to know that so we can move forward. I hate to blow your presentation here.
That's okay. Listen, I will say this, the hope was to start a conversation today. And again, it's not necessarily about looking back, it's about looking where we are currently
Exactly.
and trying to see from here, where do we go forward? And I think, this is a fine launching point for the conversations ahead. We've always had tough conversations, so I don't shy away from that with you, but I think in the end, if we can get to a better place and be able to come together and get the results that we need for kids and for our teachers and for our students and just everybody working in the schools, then in the end, these types of conversations are good for the work ahead. So
Agree. Okay, well, we're gonna complete this item now and bring it back. How about that?
that works. I will just go to the end. That way you know who to talk to. So
Okay,
I appreciate you very much. Thank you.
thank you. All right, let's go to our next new business item. And I think Dr. Pamela Shue's gonna present the early learning kindergarten entry assessment update.
Good afternoon, Chairman Kobe, State Board of Education members, Superintendent Johnson, Vice Chair Davis, and advisees and our guests here today. Let me see if I can try to provide you with some happy information. One of the things I was asked to do was, we have some kindergarten entry assessment information that I need to bring forward to you, but I was also asked to do a bit of an overview of the early childhood education here at DPI. Do you want me to continue with that or stick with the KA? Okay, and I will. I know we're getting late in the day, but I'll do as best I can. Oops, where's the, just a really quick history, and some of you may or may not be familiar with this, but Moore at 4 started in 2001, and then the Office of School Ready that housed the Moore at 4 was developed was created in 2005. And in the Office of School Readiness was Exceptional Children, Title I Preschool, and the Head Start Collaborative Office. In 2006, there was a Type 1 transfer to DPI, and the Office of Early Learning was created, where it houses the early childhood section from K through 2nd grade. Eventually, in 2011, Early Learning Sensory Support Services were transferred to DHS, from DHS to the Office of Early Learning, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a second. And then Governor Moorhead's Preschool and Early Intervention for DHS was also put under the Sensory Support Services. Office of Early Learning was then reorged, and that's when we saw that Moore at 4 moved to DHS. And at that time, about 25.25 full-time positions were abolished. So the Office of Early Learning lost a lot of staff at that time. In 2012, then there was the Read to Achieve Early Learning Challenge Grant was awarded, and we also had the Read to Achieve law. Wait, I didn't do that right. Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grant was awarded, and then the Read to Achieve became law at the same time. KEA was in development, and then in 2013-14, Read to Achieve was implemented statewide, and 2015, KEA was implemented statewide. So at this time, there was a lot of movement going on where programs were moved under different support divisions and departments, as well as we had laws having us roll out different types of standards and assessments. Let's go to the next one. And I just wanted to show this, and I have to update it a little bit. But what a lot of people don't know when I show them this is we are responsible for birth to 3-year-olds under the sensory support programs for young children, which is hearing and visually impaired. So we oversee those children, and we have teachers out throughout the state working with children and families in child care programs and in homes with these young children. We also oversee the early Head Start, which is birth through 3-year-olds. In the preschool years, DPI is responsible for Title I preschool, Exceptional Children preschool, and you met Vivian James, who oversees that. She's a great asset there. We have Head Start for 3 to 5-year-olds. What I don't have on here is sensory support for visually impaired. We also have for preschool and for hearing impaired. In kindergarten, we are responsible for the kindergarten entry assessment, Title I work that we do, and then the K-3 literacy division with the Read to Achieve. And then the 1st through 3rd grade, we have the K-3 literacy Read to Achieve as well. So we do work with children from birth through grades 3 in the early education years. What is the kindergarten entry assessment? Let's say it is in law. I just want to explain that it is in law, and the State Board of Education shall ensure that every student entering kindergarten shall complete a kindergarten entry assessment within the 60 days of enrollment. So on the 60th day, by that time, teachers must assess the child and upload some evidences, which I can explain a little bit in a second. Then there was the KEA is in the Office of Early Learning, and it started statewide 2015-2016. So with the KEA, we know it is a formative assessment, which means the teachers implementing the KEA is supposed to be done in the classroom, and is the intent of the KEA to capture the development of each child in kindergarten and to inform instruction and the education planning. So it is for the teacher to actually look, observe, gather data, evidences to inform what they should be doing in the classroom with the child. And under the KEA, it has to look at the 5 essential domains of school readiness. And here are the 5 domains that the KEA takes into consideration: the cognitive development, language development, approaches to early learning, health and physical development, and social and emotional development. We don't have literacy on here, and the reason the literacy is not is particularly highlighted here is because we catch that data in our M class. So it's not that it's not important, it's just that the M class catches for kindergarten print awareness and book orientation. So I don't want you to think that we ignored it. It's just that way it's not duplicated. Teachers don't feel like they're uploading 2 things with literacy. And this is what I really wanted to bring to your attention. The Office of Early Learning has been working very hard with an interpretation panel, which is a group of stakeholders in the community that has been looking at the KEA in a way in which we can rate and provide more quantitative data around how children are developing with the KEA. So what I have here is each of the developmental domains, and this is an example of the learning progression one. We have engagement in self-activities, emotional literacy, we have the different constructs, and then we have, if it's developing, which is considered emerging, and then there's demonstrating and beyond. So what the teacher would be able to do is go in and then show where the child is actually developing at that point in time, and then be able to also provide evidence and information on how the child's developing as the school year continues on. And these are things that we want to bring before the board because we're supposed to be able to provide quantitative data for the longitudinal data system, and so these are just to kind of go over what we'd like to bring forth at the next meeting as well. And so there'll be these actually would be coded, and the children, the teachers will be able to actually rate kind of where the child's at. Dr. Willoughby, did you have a question?
No, I'm just trying to, you keep saying quantitative.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just, there'd be actually numbers assigned to each one of those ranges. In the law, it says we have to do quantitative and qualitative.
I'm very clear about
Okay.
the law, and I think that's part of our previous
Yeah, I know, I agree.
And I think
And
that's,
there's
you know,
this,
that's a place that, you know, that is the law. We're doing what we have to do to.
but this is, I mean, I'm bringing this forward just for discussion too, so this is a great opportunity, like, for next time to come back and, or to be, you know, even after the meeting, have the discussion on how we think we really should have this look, moving forward.
But to your point, we have very little
Yes.
wiggle room because it is the state law to have a
Mhm.
quantitative
Yeah.
number assigned to entering kindergartners, so.
Exactly.
I just want to make sure we all hear that and that that's part of what we.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you
was-
very much for that.
No.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this wasn't created because we wanted to start all of a sudden adding quantitative, you know, data to this. It was, it is what we're held accountable to.
Have we changed vendors for that?
No, no, not the KEA, no.
Not the emphasis.
The M class, where we have to do, it's up to it's at our 5-year point, and we'll be putting out a new RFP for the M class, but that's a different vendor than the KEA.
Who is the vendor?
Well, then I wrote it down wrong because I asked the superintendent. He mentioned teaching strategies.
Teaching Strategies is the KEA, and Amplify is the M class vendor.
So that's not a new contract. It is the old.
Yeah, we're with the current vendors that started it. Yep. Mhm.
Do we, how do we track data about, children who have been served through one of our state pre-K programs versus children who have had the opportunity to go to, a private daycare and or preschool, and then that cohort of students that haven't been served by any program? Do we have any kind of statistics?
Actually, the DHS right now is they are looking to actually do a study. What we do know is DHS does do studies because NC Pre-K is housed, and they have the child care program in North Carolina Pre-K. So they have done studies every year on how preschool children, their outcomes. However, what they haven't done is really followed them into kindergarten. So this is going to be their first year. They're actually going to be following them to kindergarten, and they are actually looking at NC Pre-K children compared to children who haven't been served within the NC Pre-K program. So this is relatively new when it comes to following the children from, you know, the NC Pre-K classrooms into, you know, our kindergarten classrooms.
So the reason behind my questioning is, when you're a student of learning and you know there's going to be tests, I want to be prepared for the test, right? And so what we know about, our pre-K students who enter kindergarten, and there's that gap, that identified gap. Once that assessment is formalized, how are we communicating to our stakeholder groups, number one being parents, that this is the expectation for children who are going to be entering kindergarten, and better communication in that field would better equip our children to be ready to be successful in kindergarten. It would help eliminate that gap.
Agree. Agree. Yeah. Now there is work going on between DHS and DPI, Office of Early Learning, with the transition from pre-K to kindergarten, and that work is there's some pilot work going on right now, because one of the things that we've always known is that information from what happens in preschool needs to be follow a child into kindergarten, but there hasn't actually been anything developed up until recently with working on this pilot project moving forward to see how we can get that data. it's easier, I should say, when an NC pre-K classroom is in a public school because they obviously have the ID numbers and it can follow that child. The challenge is when the children are in preschool, but it's not in a public school and they don't have that unique identifiers. So that's something that the two work groups, a group from DHS and our Office of Early Learning, are working on to try to see what are the options to be able to help with that. But getting to your point, yes, I mean, there are specific skills that we know are necessary for kindergarten to be successful. Which will take me into another part, but my K through literacy consultants, we met last month, and what they're doing now is we're digging deeper into our data, and we're looking at what is going on in kindergarten. So where do we see children in kindergarten doing well on the M-Class, and where we see that there's challenges and maybe they're not doing well, and looking at how we really target and focus our work to support what's going on in the regions and the districts and the schools, instead of just saying when a school calls and says, oh, we need some professional development around writing or something like that, but really actually pulling in that data at the school level and saying, wait a minute, by third grade we notice most of your kids they're still struggling in phonological awareness. So where do we need to go back? We need to go back and really start targeting, those particular pieces. So there is some work going on with my teams, really digging in deeper to the data and seeing how we should really refocus and support what's really going on out there, as opposed to sometimes we just get calls saying, hey, we need help with this or that. But really to say there needs to be intention, very intentional work going on around those pieces. And I'm not sure that will be that's obviously just from the K through third grade literacy consultants, really looking at how we structure our work. There's only 8 of them, 1 in every region. So we really have to rethink how we support, our schools. And with this new regional support structure that we're rolling out too, how they can be part of the regional supports, and how we really provide what the schools need in order to kind of build their capacity. That kind of helps.
Ms. Willoughby has a...
I'm outrunning my memory headlights here, but maybe, and I know it predated your being here, so I won't put you on the spot, but NC Pre-K used to be here.
Oh, yes.
And we had a pretty good continuum. I can't remember exactly what we called it, but we had a pretty good continuum that I think addresses some of Ms. White's questions and concerns very appropriately. So, I mean, that might be something to look at and think about, how that, yeah, it was not our choice that it got moved.
Right,
but
yeah, I agree, yeah. And I'll move on. I also want to let you know some great work that's going on in the Office of Early Learning around North Carolina pre-K and kindergarten demonstration programs. I think we have some really good demonstration classrooms in the state that can be used, where other teachers can go in and actually see and see the good work and good strategies and examples and skills that are going on within classrooms. So what we're also looking at is talking to our Head Start Collaborative, Karen McKnight. We're looking at also doing not just pre-K demonstration programs that teachers can go into, kindergarten as well as Head Start, and then talking to Vivian James about the work of the pyramid model and having teachers be able to go in and actually observe great practice around those. I think that we don't have a lot right now throughout the state. Sometimes teachers move on or retire, so we really are looking at how we can build that capacity so we have better examples throughout the state. That live actually seeing it in action type of ability, and then to be able to also sit there and talk to teachers to know how they have implemented and developed stronger classroom practices. Oops, sorry.
Mr. Davis?
Dr. Hsu, I just want to compliment your team for these demonstration programs. I think this is exactly what we need. And in fact, with what you're doing here, with what's going on in Rowan, Salisbury, Guilford, Davie, other counties, it really reminds me of many years ago when the same budding effort was underway around kindergarten.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the realization that the way to really make it work is statewide, with state support. So I just offer that as maybe a goal of this group to rally around trying to follow the same path to make pre-K something that every North Carolina student, every child gets the benefit of. Because we know how important it is. And it will take the whole state to make it work.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think we're going to have some good lessons learned, too, from some of the communities around the state that have started to do universal pre-K, such as Charlotte, Mecklenburg. I know Forsyth County is looking at it, too. So I think there's going to be good lessons because all children can benefit from a statewide preschool program. Absolutely. It's just the quality is higher than in most typical other programs. So, yeah.
Dr. Oxendine.
And I would recommend you along, within that same spirit, I'm almost sure that at Southside Ashpole, our ISD school, in North Carolina, which is in Robson, there is a pre-K program, a 4-year-old program house there in that school. I think it would be really good to go visit the pre-K program, the 4-year-old program, and I would hope to see some interaction between those teachers and the K-5 teachers.
Absolutely.
Catching on kind of mindset.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you. And then moving on to the K3 literacy updates too. I just wanted to let you all know, I kind of mentioned it. We have the reading assessment, the M-Class Dibbles. We do professional development training also with K3. Again, we're looking at our data and really making sure that the work, the professional development that we move forward and the training is intentional and actually has data behind it on what we need to provide. Master literacy trainers are still being supported, and we're looking again at how we can define and strengthen that work. And then the Wolfpack Works is just rolled out, and so far everything's looking good around that. And that's been a really positive experience that we received back from that work. And then the next steps for K3 literacy is the new diagnostic assessment tool will be rolling, RFP will be rolling out. We are looking at reading camps and the supports around that, and we're getting data back on that, and we'll be taking a look at how we can improve some of our reading camp work. And then again, building the expertise in professional development and training that we know we need in our schools. So the literacy, not just generalists I keep speaking to, but we need specialists around literacy, we need specialists around STEM and math, and we need the specialists around some of the work that Vivian was talking